When night came, she put everything in order without being asked. I love that it says like without being asked. Like, yeah, if some rando showed up and started doing stuff in my house, I wouldn't ask them to like do the dishes either. Then she slept with Cualigne. Okay, that's important because we skip down and like sometime later, we don't know how much later, but sometime later, there is a fair and Cualigne goes to the fair. And as he's headed out to go to the fair, this lady gives him a reminder, just kind of out of the blue. It would be as well not to grow boastful or careless in anything you say. Oh, that isn't likely, he said. We already know, like, famous last words, okay? Oh, I won't do that. Sure. The fair was held. At the end of the day, the king's chariot was brought onto the field. His chariot and horses won. Now, this is one of those examples of the residual manuscript orality where you have the consolation and the readers have to connect the dots. This is what I'm talking about. At no point did it say that the field was a race field or that the king's chariot and horses were going to run in a race on it. They were brought onto the field and they won. And we have to infer that they won a race and that the field is a racetrack. The crowd said that nothing could beat those horses. My wife is faster, Cualigne said. I don't know what kind of a world you have to be living in to see some horses win a race and go, my wife is faster than your horses. Has he even ever seen her run? We don't see. He was taken immediately before the king and the woman was sent for. She said to the messenger, it would be a heavy burden for me to go and free him now. I am full with child. So I told you it was important that she slept with Cualigne. This is why it's important. I am full with child. Burden, the messenger said. He will die unless you come. Okay, residual manuscript orality again, right? The guy was taken before the king and there's no, like, they don't say, like the story does not say, taken before the king in chains and subject to execution. But we can infer that from the fact that she says she can't go free him. So he's not like just hanging out at the dinner table with the king. And from the fact that the messenger's like, no, they're going to kill him. You got to come. Oh, okay. So she went to the fair and the pains gripped her. So she's full with child, right? So she's having contractions. She called out to the crowd, a mother bore each one of you. Help me. Wait until my child is born. Which, fair? Like, can I get an extension? I'm in childbirth. But she couldn't move them. It's not spelled out why the crowd would be able to have any influence here when it's the king who's holding Cualigne. We're left to infer. Very well, she said. A long-lasting evil will come out of this on the whole of Ulster. Because remember, we're in Ulster. What is your name? The king said. My name and the name of my offspring, she said, will be given to this place. I am Macha, daughter of Senric. No, sorry. Let me try that again. Sanric Mac Imweith. The M and B together, like they're both supposed to be pronounced like a V when they're between vowels. My English-speaking brain does not want to make that interpretation. But then she raced the chariot. Now, it's not said that what is asked of her here is to race the chariot. I have a couple of versions, I have a couple of longer versions of this story in which all of these pieces are spelled out in greater detail. So they were floating around in Ireland at this time. That's why the residual manuscript orality thing works. This tale already exists in longer forms with more of the blanks filled in, and readers and, well, listeners and the scribes would all have been familiar with those longer versions. So they don't need them here, right? It only works that way. Then she raced the chariot. As the chariot reached the end of the field, she gave birth alongside it. She wins this race, by the way, just saying. She bore twins, a son and a daughter. The name Evin Macha, the twins of Macha, comes from this. As she gave birth, she screamed out that all who heard that scream would suffer from the same pains for 5 days and 4 nights in their times of greatest difficulty. This affliction, ever afterward, seized all the men of Ulster who were there that day and 9 generations after them. 5 days and 4 nights, or 5 nights and 4 days, the pangs lasted. This is interesting. Like in Genesis, we see the pairs, and we see the number 7 repeated again and again. We also a couple of times see the number 14, so a pair of 7s. In Irish literature, not always, but often, it's the number 9. So 3 3s. For 9 generations, any Ulsterman in those pangs had no more strength than a woman on the bed of labor. So there's this like very direct relationship between the crime, which is like making a pregnant woman race a chariot with horses, and the punishment. You will feel like these guys who did not intervene on her behalf are subject to feel the suffering that she felt. There's a clear, like, justice is spelled out here. Like, the punishment fits the crime, right? Except it also fits the crime for like 9 generations on. Only 3 classes of people were free from the pangs of Ulster. So there are 3 groups of people who are exempt from her curse. So the first group is the young boys of Ulster, the second group is the women, and the third is Cualigne. So he is a category unto himself. Ulster was thus afflicted from, and it gives like the genealogy here. But what I want you to notice, well, I want you to notice a couple of things, maybe a few things. I want you to notice that Cualigne is going to be exempt because that's why he can go out and act as the champion on behalf of Ulster. I want you to notice that all the grown men of Ulster are subject to this curse. If you are still a beardless young man, right, like you haven't started shaving yet, and the cults did do some shaving, you are exempt. And the women are exempt. The women are apparently not to blame. Or maybe Macha feels some sympathy for them. It's not really clarified, but it's only the grown men who are subject to this curse. The grown men minus Cualigne. And it doesn't say that in this telling, because this is that residual manuscript orality again. But there are some backstory kind of reasons why Cualigne is exempt, and they have to do with the fact that he's not actually one of the Ulstermen, like he's an import. He is being fostered at the court of Conqueror Machnessa. So I hope that this helps you, like the discussion of the residual manuscript kind of thing, like as I move through this very short section. I hope that helps you understand how it's supposed to work, and I tried to also sort of fill in for you some of the blanks that listeners and or scribes working with this particular version would have had. If you have questions about those gaps, I'm happy to answer them. I actually have several versions of the same story and actually can do the thing where I fill in the gaps for you if you have questions about them. But for the purposes of this video and this kind of like introductory guide, I really just wanted you to sort of notice where they were and how the filling in would work. And I also wanted you to notice this sort of the difference in gender dynamics and the role of women between this text and the Iliad, which we just read. I think I already highlighted the fact that like women, other than goddesses, women in the Iliad are like not major actors on the page, like they're not moving, like they are not, their decisions are not moving the action forward. But if you say that the Iliad doesn't really deal with women very much, that's not quite true, because a lot of like women are the plot points around which the story turns at several key junctures, right? Most notably, we would not be here if it weren't for Helen, right? Like where women are and what happens to them forms a key plot point all along the way. That happens, like the very first scene is about where a woman is and what happens to her. And then the tiff between Achilles and Agamemnon, also over where a woman is and what happens to her. And that happens again and again and again with these women from whom we really don't hear very much. Helen does get some speaking lines late in the action. That's quite different from like this woman who shows up mysteriously out of nowhere. She's the only person making a decision here. Like Cualigne is just like, hi, okay. I mean, she wanders in, she decides to come. She wanders in, she takes over the house, she sleeps with him. He's apparently good with this. Like we don't see that he's complaining, but like he's not doing anything. She gives him a warning and then he ignores the warning. And there's kind of a repeated, like it doesn't show up that much in this set of stories, but there is kind of a repeated thing where women give you a warning and then somebody ignores the warning and shit goes to hell, basically. In Irish literature, like a woman, we don't know why she knows or how she knows, but she's like, yeah, you shouldn't do that. And the guy does that. And then later, usually there's a second scene where she's like, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. And it's just like, it's a repeated motif. And it's not quite like Cassandra in Greek epic or in Greek myth. Like, she's a one-off, and this is like sort of permeates Irish literature. It's Macha's curse, it's Macha's choice over and over again. She also, like, I always think it's neat, she actually does win the race. Like, she doesn't want to do it, but she does it. Like, she's like, I don't want to race these horses. I'm pregnant. And they're like, nope, you gotta. And she could have thrown the race, but she doesn't. She wins. And then she curses them. And I don't know why, but I always really enjoy that part of the story. She's, but she wins it anyway. And then she lays her curse. So, okay, there are several more of these like small pieces of backstory, like small pieces of constellation that I have given you as part of your intro to the Táin PDF in Canvas. We'll talk about them a little bit tomorrow. Tomorrow is Thursday, October the 7th. And we'll also, I hope, begin to work with the actual text of the Táin. We're not going to read the whole thing. If you want to, I can tell you that the Kindle version of the Kinsella translation is available on Amazon for about $9.99. Totally worth the read. But we're only going to read some excerpts so you can kind of get a feel for it. And we're going to talk about them in relation to the Iliad as two examples of relatively early epic. We're going to kind of compare and contrast a little bit and see what kind of inferences we can make using Bauman's reciprocal program. If you want to understand a culture, read its texts. If you want to understand a text, read it in relation to the culture which produced it. That's all for now. Thanks. Talk to you soon.